Do you guys remember how in episode 1 I was like, "Oh, a forked stick? We love forked sticks. we love a good stang." I see a forked stick on the path and I go, "Oh my god, it's a stang. We should collect it." Um, as much as that's a bit of an exaggeration, because obviously, we have actual packed reasons for needing certain kinds of woods and things. I would have to say the same thing probably goes with hagstones, because I keep my eyes peeled to the ground, okay, when I walk. And not because I'm one of those occultists who can't make eye contact with people or request extra ketchup from the waiter. It's because I'm searching for the holes. One of my first actually one of my first dates with Salt in England when I visited him was walking along Brighton Beach, which and Brighton's a beautiful, beautiful place. The beach is gorgeous, but it's a pebble beach, right? It's not a sand one. So, we were holding hands, all romantic, but then eventually just started frantically scurrying around, giggling and collecting like 30, 50 hagstones. And we were saying our little charms and prayers. Then we shared ice cream together while going over which ones we'll use for what, and it was really cute. And of course, we were very naive because when we got back home, our spirits immediately started claiming like 70% of them. So, the ones we got to keep to ourselves to do things with for our own needs, very few compared to the amounts that like spirits were like, hang these 7 by my shrine. Oh, put these in my pot and so on and so forth, cover these in blood and wine and then do these things to it. So, it was what it was. But, it's truly a witchcraft moment, right? You can't walk by a beach without scanning for the stones.
Yeah, definitely. Throwback to the Scotland Forever moment from a couple episodes ago, but when I was on the mission to Scotland, one of the first things I did is ran down to a nearby pebble beach with one of the other people I was on such a mission with and said, "You're a mineralogist. Find hagstones." And tasked a bunch of the other people I was there with to comb this beach with me, and we found a bunch of them. And they're like, "Why do you want all of these?" And I'm like, "The fewer questions you ask, probably for the better."
I like how you used your friend as like almost like a spirit, like when you collect their dirt, and it's like, oh, you were a cop, or you were an army soldier person. No, you were a priest. You were like, you're a mineralogist. I command thee, find the holy stones.
That's a good use of their skills, right?
Of course, yeah. At this point, it's not even the water that makes the holes, right? It's the eyes of us witches drilling them by staring too long until they form.
Mhm.
It's like, is that a shadow? Is that a little blip? What is that little mark? Is that a hole? And then, of course, it doesn't even penetrate the entire way. Sometimes, like, oh, give it another 1,000 years and that will become a hole, But right now, it's still making its way through.
A teasing stone.
Yeah, a teasing stone. So true. With Salt and I just like tossing them back and being like, okay, you did your service. We'll be back next incarnation, okay, for you. You stay put.
That's absolutely the worst feeling when you find one that looks like so perfect for what you need it for. Pick it up. It's got like 4 or 5 holes in it and none of them are complete. It's like, come on, man.
Oh my god, listen. This is why I go on Etsy and I comb through the various like lists of hagstone lots that include specific numbers of holes and just buy up as many as I need. Here's 7 holes, here's 9 holes, here's 3, here's 2, whichever ones I need, I will just gobble up immediately because my spirits be wanting those things. But right, it's the Hagstone episode. I've been wanting to research this one for a while because I have so much Slavic stuff to share that isn't really out there as much in English, but also it's just such a classic, reliable amulet and so utterly vital to all 3 of us. So let's go to the music and get a little holy with these stones. Be not alarmed at the frightful howls which you may hear. It's Sfinga, Salt, and Basilisk Egg Key. Last week you were Barrel Stone, right, for the Scrag episode. Yes.
In a very mineralogy-driven bee phase at the moment. We're calcinating over here. We're laying sediments and
Hell yeah.
Well, apparently now there's a toad asleep on your head, so
It's true. It's true. Little buddy just chilling on you as you incubate your egg. One of the reasons I wanted to do a Hagstone episode within the first 10 of the podcast was really just because, they've popped up in all these different episodes too, right? And after looking a little bit more into Buffonite, for a Toadman and a Toadstone, I was just like, it's time. I mean, out of the three of us, two of us basically wear a Hagstone 24/7 anyway.
It's very true.
Yeah, and so and all of us have us, on car windshields, and on God knows every kind of doorknob and thing in the house. So especially as you're moving in with us so soon, Key, I think the three of us are just going to combine our Hagstone collections, and it'll be like those like beaded curtains. So, like to enter a room, you have to like part these things like the Red Sea.
Okay, that would actually be kind of awesome though, like in front of one of the many, shrine chambers in the house. Just have this curtain of like 121 hagstones would kind of rock. We'll talk about that one.
Hell yeah. Okay. Well, I'm jotting this down. It's literally just occurred to me, but we're definitely going to do something along those lines. But yeah, there's so much you could say on Hagstones, right? This could be 7 episodes, and so in order to keep things fairly, concrete for the sake of our time, I wanted to kind of break it down in 3 main sections. One, we're going to look at some Western European, primarily, English sources. Key is going to take us through a bit of Germanic lore, and then I'll head us back to some Eastern European and Slavic-speaking, specifically, sources. So it'll be fun to kind of compare some of these things, and also just go over the provenance of these in folk magic and in our magic, especially. So to start us off, there's a great deal of lore surrounding the use of naturally hold stones, right, in warding off witches, fairies, and nightmares in the early modern and modern eras. And of course, it's good to note why regrouping these 3 categories together, because witches, of course, are not human, right? They're monsters, much like nightmares and all kinds of other creatures. So much of this particular research that I did comes out of our favorite Owen Devies. Owen Devies and Siri Holbrook's chapter, Seeking Protection, Objects of Power, in an anthology called Building Magic, Ritual and Reenchantment in Post-Medieval Structures. In this article, they note a particular quote from Samuel Butler's poem Hudibras, written between 1660 and 1680, and there's a passage satirizing folk beliefs and thereby preserving them, right? In our I think we just at this point called this like the Reginald Scott maneuver. He is far from the first person. You know what I mean? Like every theologian, every person in any culture, criticizing auguries and fortunes, Plutarch. This is not an uncommon thing. It's just for some reason, it's because every single time there's like something we want to talk about, it's in Discovery of Witchcraft, and there's like a perfectly preserved thing. But yeah, anyway, so we're calling this like certified, Reginald Scott moment. But so he was satirizing beliefs, and therefore, we preserved them. So here's a line from the poem.
Chase evil spirits away by dint of sickle, horseshoe, hollow flint.
Right, so these are, literally some of the most common materia used, in protecting yourself from the evil eye, from curses, from witchcraft. And hollow flint, of course, is our hagstone. And it's worth noting that throughout this episode, we're going to refer to like tons of different names for these. Hagstone is just the popular one in English that we're using for the sake of having one term to refer to, naturally hold stones specifically. But there's so many more, right? So hagstones are widely used throughout the UK, but we also hear lucky stone, holy stone, as in like the whole, as not just like holy as in sacred, but as our pun, right? And I think it's an intentional pun. We find that in northeastern England. Witch stones we hear a lot across cultures, especially in southern, eastern, and midland England. But this translation of witch stone you'll find in many other cultures as well. Mare stones is a nightmare, like nightmare horse in parts of Scotland. Interestingly, in Yorkshire, apparently bitch daughter stones, which I found especially funny. You're a bitch daughter stone. Yeah, it is. Well, I think it's also it could be a thing at a wedlock. It could be a thing referring to female dogs, these kinds of things, But I think because daughter isn't there, it's just some kind of like, okay, all right. I see you, Yorkshire. But yeah, so these are just some ones from Davies and Holbrook's chapter. And it's worth asking, are stones with naturally formed holes caused by water, or wind eroding weakened spots until a hole forms, or smaller stones grinding against one another until the pressure punctures the space? And the answer is really all three, right? They can form in many different ways. And, whether they're made of certain kinds of rock or formations depends on where you are, right? You'll see plenty of the flint ones in England, especially. And they're most commonly found by pebble beaches or by rivers, where stones and pebbles have had plenty of time for water to flow through them and over them and erode these weak spots into holes. Large numbers, of course, being made of flint. These are going to be the popular ones that you'll see, especially if you're going to go and buy some, on Etsy or whatever like that. These are ones that you'll probably find. Melusine Draco has a book called Hagstones, and all about this kind of research. And she notes that in some of the old Victorian compilations about superstitions, customs, and folklore, they are explicitly referred to and described as a flint stone with a hole, right? And we just saw in our Samuel Butler poem, Hollow Flint being the same name. And they're commonly hung, like iron, to ward off nightmares, succubuses, or succubi, I suppose would be the correct plural, anything that might try and steal your vitality and your fertility, your peace of mind when you're sleeping, and not just for people, right, but also for horses, in which case flint with naturally formed holes might be put by the manger around the neck of the animal to protect it from all manner of sorcery or the evil eye that might come to bear misfortune upon the animal. An early example practice was recorded in the mid-16th century by Thomas Blundeville of Norfolk in his The Order of Curing Horses' Diseases. This was printed in 1566. So he includes in this compilation a quote-unquote foolish charm that was to be written down while hanging a quote flint stone that hath a hole of his own. Shoutouts to stones whom hath a hole of their own. I really like the phrasing of that. But again, this is another Scott moment, right? Because he's saying this is foolish, this is silly, but then preserves a really cool oral charm, which is as follows.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Saint George Our Lady's night, he walked day, so did he night, until he her found, he her beat and bound, till truly her truth she employed, that she would not come with the night. There is Saint George Our Lady's night, name was 3 times Saint George.
And while Blundeville found this to be, a really silly way to con money out of, quote, plain folks' purses, those silly cunning men and their silly ways, trying to con the common man out of his purse, right? He, much like Reginald Scott, again, does us the massive favor of preserving this. And speaking of our boy Scott, it's time to turn to him because we have a very similar charm, which undoubtedly was passed on through oral tradition before then, preserved in Discovery Witchcraft, which is a very similar and also refers to St. George, not necessarily by name, but certainly, as you'll see, by image.
The man o nicht, he reed o nicht, wie neder serd, ne ferd ne licht. He sock the mare, he fond the mare, he bond the mare, wi air and hair. On ger her swar, by midder micht, she wod ne mare, reed o nicht, oran sie reed, the man o nicht.
And the English translation of this is as follows.
The man of might, he rode all night, with neither sword nor army nor light. He sought the mare, he found the mare with her own air. She made her swear by mother's might, that no more would she ride at night, where once he rode that man of might.
This is an anti-nightmare charm, right? Because the mare is really the nightmare, and she's being bound here by the man of might, which is definitely a St. George on his white horse riding in and subjugating the nightmare reference. And it's interesting, there's plenty of things you can do with this. One charm that I've made for my mom, actually, because she was suffering from some nightmares, was I braided white horsehair because of George's white horse through a hagstone, looping it around and hung it over her bedpost while chanting this over and over and over again. And specifically, I chose to do it in the Old English, which Keith pronounced for us very beautifully, high-fiving him over our shared ability to speak German, which allows us to have a bit of an easier time with some of the older English stuff. But, it is obviously works just as well with the modern English that Salt beautifully read for us. An interesting example also comes to us from Marykirk, Scotland, in which a hagstone was found inside a house with 2 human teeth inserted into the holes. And for me, this is really fascinating because we'll do an episode on this in the future with Talason and other kinds of like Balkan practices over human internment into houses. But like seeing the teeth inserted into the holes makes me think that this was possibly used to either protect the person whose teeth it was or to cure toothache if others had fallen out. And so you might want to use those. Because we'll get into it later in this episode, but there's plenty of ways you can like heal headaches and toothaches and various kinds of sprains with hagstones by looping in some ways the essence of the pain through the hole and having it pass through.
I love how kind of metal this talisman as well
Mhm.
looks when you imagine the archaeologist or the historian who pulls out of the wall being like, oh my god, this is like teeth sticking out of a rock. This is awesome.
It is pretty awesome, yeah. And I love the Manamite charm. Just going back to it for a second, like I have one over my bed where Salt and I sleep, like just like this with the white horsehair and everything, and it works tremendously well. I have plenty of, it's not so much to dissuade nightmares in the sense of like unpleasant dreams, which certainly you could do kinds of magic for, but sometimes like I would say the vast majority of traditions that I'm in do communicate to me with unpleasant dreams. Like that's not uncommon. Certainly I don't want to necessarily dissuade that. It's more to prevent things like, any kinds of like hag writing or assault or some kind of like psychic trauma that can occur in sleep when your parts of your souls that are trapped vulnerable, even with the protection of your spirit intercessors. It's just a nice thing to have there, and also allows, I've tailored it with 2 holes to allow me to travel more easily in dreams and to have my spirits pass through into my dreams more easily to deliver messages. But obviously that kind of comes out of the typology of what each number of holes does in my tradition. But that is perhaps for another time.
Yeah, and as we delve further into some of the Germanic sources later, we see a lot of parallels to this, even with St. George by name, wherein we find, this typology of hagstones being used to protect the sleeping person, especially as they dream from spirits that would seek to interfere with them for one reason or another.
Oh, for sure. It's a common thing in like all the way from the Balkans to Russia, as well as this understanding of these are the charms to protect fertility, to protect wealth, and to protect you in your sanctity from any spirits or witches that might try and harm you in your sleep when you're especially vulnerable. So we see examples, of hagstones being frequently hung out in open view in or around buildings, above beds or on the bed frame, and within animal stables to protect against nightmares and rheumatism. And much like horseshoes, they were occasionally concealed in walls, such as in one case in which a holed flintstone was found attached to a peg inside a brick wall of the workhouse at Thame in 1836. So here's a quote from Davies and Holbrook's chapter about an interesting case study of a similar situation hailing from Suffolk.
In the 1830s, Edward Moore, who researched the words and dialect of Suffolk, noted a recent conversation between a farmer and a master butcher in the neighborhood of Woodbridge, which shows the precision with which hagstones were sometimes suspended. The 2 men were concerned about an unusually hot calf, the butcher explained.
Pharisees have been here. I've been riding that there poor calf all night.
He went on to advise getting a stone with a hole in it and hanging it up in the calf's crib.
Just high enough not to touch the calves' backs when it's standing up.
And of course, this would
brush the Pharisees off the poor beast when they attempt to gollop him round.
This made sense to Moore, who had long seen a similar suspended holed stone just above the horses' backs in his own stables. A visitor to a cottage in Lincolnshire recalled in the 1890s seeing a 3-cornered holed flint covered in cobwebs hanging from a nail by a loop made of tape at the side of the front door. The woman of the cottage explained that it was to keep witches from the house, and when the visitor remarked that he had not heard of such a thing before, she said,
"We never tell gentle folks about such things for fear they should laugh at us. But we all keep witch stones, and that I've given you as my grandmother's, and we've had it more than 100 years.
I absolutely love this example. One, the woman at the end saying that, this was her grandmother's stone. She inherited from her. She's had it for over 100 years in her family, and it's been used to protect against witches. Interesting that the butcher refers to fairies as the Pharisees, and of course, like the idea of fairies like riding farm animals until they're tired out is not a new one by any means. Certainly, plenty of charms exist to protect livestock from not just witches and other spirits that might seek to like steal their milk and put it in their own cow's milk, that kind of thing. But the whole thing of horses being ridden by fairies until they're exhausted is quite prolific one. But I just found that interesting they refer to them as Pharisees because that makes my mind mind to go like, that is a new spin on the Bible that I've not heard before. But
I think it's quite limited to the Suffolk region, from what I understand. Maybe in East here as well, but mostly the south and southeast, I think, is where you'd normally hear that.
Yeah. But yeah, I just love the idea of the inherited hagstone, because so many of them that I just kind of have lying around that I've collected on beaches and things, I just had them hanging in places. But the idea that I don't know, like my great grandchildren might one day be like, oh, this was the stone that my great grandmother found on this one beach, and it's been in our family for this many years, and it's used to protect against nightmares. Or I don't know, that it makes my heart really warm at the idea of like inherited hagstones. There's something very beautiful about that. I mean, obviously inherited tools in general, but there's something about like the rock being like so precious and so relied upon for the same task. That's really beautiful to me.
No, really, it's a beautiful little transmission, and it goes to show, transmission is be complicated. Sometimes it's just, hey, here's a stone that's protected our family for generations, and now it's yours, and your kids will have it as well.
Davies and Holbrook also cite an 1874 survey of hagstones, which revealed that although their presence and use had diminished over the previous 20 years, they could still be found in various farms and homes. One illuminating quote is that several examples, quote, yet hang by their rotten strings, for they have hung for over 100 years or more. And that is just so cool to me. Again, like, we saw the example of tape, we saw the example of rope and so on, and here it's just like this rotting string over 100 years or more, and it's still hanging on there for dear life, above that stable. One pair was seen in 1874 by the author of the survey hanging from a string from a joist in an old house. And the 77-year-old widow who had owned the place said that she had known them hanging there for most of her life, and that her late husband was very particular about them being put back carefully whenever the room was cleaned. Clearly, demonstrating this was something that he relied on, especially protection in his own home.
Put the deceased husband who is particular about the stones on the phone.
Yeah, literally put him on my phone, give him my number. I want to talk to him about his cleaning ritual, because it's not just like, what is it used for? It's like, how is it taken care of, right? How are you preserving it? What are the material that the string, can be made of that you're hanging it on? Plenty of guidelines for that in the Slavic stuff that we'll cover at the end of the episode. One of the most famous works actually on hagstones in general in scholarship comes to us from J. Jeffrey Dent's article in the Folklife Journal, being the Hold Stone Amulet and its uses. And here, Dent notes that while the uses of these stones are varied, including protecting mines from accidents, preventing plagues, averting famine and storms at sea, its primary function across English folklore is anti-witchcraft, to the point that these various attested abilities may not even represent differences in beliefs, but rather, to quote him, bear witnesses to the variety of common misfortune formerly attributed to the activities of witches, end quote. And of course, to me, fairies, not just witches, right? But like all manner of spirits that are typically associated with these kinds of misfortunes. So Dent, really says something that is common to almost all of our sources across cultures, which is that hagstones don't really require a ritual to make them work or to use them, but there is folklore regarding how it should be acquired. So in particular,
there is evidence from the south of England of a belief that the stone should be received as a gift, and even from one source, that the ideal was to steal it.
That is really cool, and not one that you often hear, right? Because I've heard a lot of folklore saying you should find it yourself, definitely receive it as a gift, which is really funny because I was just saying I buy tons of them on Etsy. I prefer to find them, obviously, but sometimes when your spirit's like, I need numbers that go into the hundreds of these for my vessel, or I need you to soak these in redacted washes and fluids and materia for this many moons. Sometimes you're just like, I'm just going to, I ask them, is it okay if I barter for them? And they're like, yes. But sometimes they're like, no, you have to find it yourself, and that's fine. Especially in particular places, like find one on a beach, find one by a river, find one in a forest, But this is interesting. That the ideal was potentially to steal it. That reminds me a lot of like stealing the power from a spirit, or like, its clothes, or the thing that it disrobes from before it takes a bath, that kind of thing. Like it's quite evocative of that.
There's also the transgressive element, right? Like when you're making black knives, a lot of the time the requirements are, this knife's been used to kill someone, or the iron's been used to hurt someone. So there's also that element of transgression involved as well.
Totally, yeah. And, Dent acknowledges that this view does not seem to be as common, but nevertheless, a stone that has been owned by many people and which is passed through the hands of a succession of owners, was generally regarded as having increased power, like we've seen in our few examples so far, right? Of these hereditary inherited stones. And I imagine stealing one of those from a family that's kept it in their care for over 100 years, that's certainly, there's a juju to that, So
yeah.
guard your stones, don't, be careful. But lock those hairbrushes up when you have guests over and guard those stones.
There's something, I think, really to be said about the unique beauty of these things requiring no particular ritual for them to just function as like a purely apotropaic charm, but their use itself is the consecration. Like they are consecrated through use. It's like, this is an object that has protected someone for 70 years. Okay, great. Moving on. It doesn't matter how it was consecrated, if at all, because it's done its job for that long. It will retain that virtue kind of no matter what you do with it.
100%, yeah.
For, really any sorcerer's tools, like what happens in, like Conjure, where your grandma's kitchen knife was the thing that did everything. And it's like, she didn't consecrate it. She didn't burn incense over it or anything. She's just like, I don't know, this is just a knife that does the thing. And now suddenly it's the one that's been used for, 50 years of workings.
Exactly, yeah. Even the Balkans, right? So many of her magic tools are kitchen utensils, ladles, pots, pans, because they're used constantly, right? That cast iron pan is the same one that you use to make your sorcery oil as it is to cook your husband dinner, right? Which, if you're jujuing your husband, certainly doesn't overlap, right? But yeah, I think you make a really good point. And speaking of which, in many cases, right, the stone is suspended by a loop of string to the point that in some districts, it is actually the tying of this knot when you loop it, to suspend the stone into the element of air, right? It is an element of earth, but to suspend it in the element of air renders the stone effective, right? And it loses its power if this string is cut, right, bringing misfortune upon its owner. And this specific belief was recorded in Yorkshire. Otherwise, nothing else needs to be done to activate it. And my mind thinks about the elements of this, because in Balkan witchcraft, we do assign elements to different kinds of hagstones depending on their color and shape. But, it's fascinating, too, that here nothing else needs to be done to really empower the stone, but it should actually be hung on a loop. It should be suspended. In some ways, sort of noting the functionability of the hole itself.
There's something really interesting about this particular consecration to me, because a lot of sources that I've seen and heard from also say not to tie it, like to do a lark's head on the knot, and like explicitly to make sure that should the stone need to get off the rope, it can get off the rope itself.
Yeah.
As opposed to like containing it. So it's kind of interesting that this is a direct inversion of oral lore from other places, which, as we are wont to see in oral lore, there could be directly contradictory things. Even down
it's proof that it's living. Yeah, it's proof it's living tradition as if it's contradicting itself, because that means that lots of people are doing it. And I think that one thing that's good to note as well is that the kind of protection that these stones offer is remarkably versatile, right? So speaking of tying it, sometimes they're fastened inside the bows of boats with copper wire. Boatmen carried them on their person or attached them to nets and as lobster pots for insurance against bad catches, which is so cool. Salt and Key are big fans of fishing and especially fishing related folklore and myths and oral charms. And that to me, I was just like, when I read that part, I was like, oh, I'm excited to share this with you guys.
I keep a hagstone in my tackle box for the same reason.
Hell yeah.
Listen, ladies, if a man's got a fish as his profile picture, but he's got a hagstone in the background, that is no longer a red flag.
It is no longer a red flag. It's true. I told the wizard council that I would be out casting, but I didn't say which spell, and you just send out your fishing wire.
Listen, the consecration of the grill and the rod are very important parts of a man's daily rituals.
It's true. Oh god. Okay. Oh, I'm gonna be thinking about the profile picture thing for a long time. Oh my god. But yeah, so excuse me. But yes, they can also be obviously hung in stables around the neck of cattle or horses to prevent disease, and of course to prevent the ability of witches to halt the production of the milk of cows. They're attached to plows for protection against the witching of crops, protect horses from being hang-ridden or being, ridden by fairies until they're exhausted, and by being hung up on the stable or attached to the stable key. And the stable key specifically is interesting, right? Because you have the hagstone plus the iron of the key, and that grants it even stronger protection. So you would have a hagstone, people's, keychains or loops as a very common protection. They're also hung on the entrance to galleries and mining shafts to prevent witches from entering mines, and worn around the neck or hung around the belt loop for personal protection, or to keep in the pocket for good luck and protection against common illnesses. And they're also employed against witches and fairies, especially those who harmed pregnant women, in which case it was often seen as fairies trying to snatch the baby from the cradle in the Isle of Man. And specifically from the same community, we have a really interesting case here from the Isle of Man, which is as follows.
The ability of witches to control the elements and to call up storms at will was generally believed. In an island community, therefore, it is not surprising to find the witch stone used by fishermen. In one case, recorded from the recollections of a fisherman in the 1920s, it illustrates the regard in which a noted hold stone was held in the 19th century. It is said that a family of fishermen by the name of Kelly had a hold stone which was worn round the neck on copper wire. The stone passed from father to son and was believed to afford protection to any boat having the wearer on board. On one occasion, the Ramsey lifeboat crew carried the then owner of the stone to the boat, he being at the time a sick man, before they would put out into the storm. The lifeboat was away for a day and a night, during which time Kelly's wife maintained that all would return safely, as was indeed the case. This is an instance of the veneration accorded to a stone in long use within a small community. But it is also from the Isle of Man that a contrary belief is recorded. From one source only came the statement that a witch stone only worked for the finder. It is unlikely that this idea was ever common. The enhanced value of an inherited stone is generally acknowledged, and sentiment, if nothing more, tends to heighten the value of an old possession.
I find the contrast between those two perspectives quite interesting here, because you kind of have this idea of the finder, obviously, on one hand, and on the other hand, it's just, is it inherited, is it passed on? So, but as far as the finder, it makes me think of spirits giving gifts, leaving gifts, like finding something in a place you wouldn't usually find it, I'd assume.
I really like this example because it also shows us, the importance of, on the one hand, the inherited stone, right? It has its own value and its own power. There's something very special about being granted an amulet from somebody else that they found. But there's also the luck in finding one itself, because they are rare, that kind of is granted to the benefactor, the person who obtains it. Speaking of Isle of Man, a good friend of mine brought back 2 beautiful hagstones for myself and one of my closest friends from the Isle of Man when she was there with her friend. And I have to say, I could genuinely feel the luck of her having found it passed on to me when she put it in my hands to be like, this is the one that I chose for you, and having collected a bunch of stones for you guys. I remember when that same Brighton trip, when I came back, I saw a Yuki and I gave you one with 2 holes that I thought was very appropriate for you. And you even remarked that out of all the hagstones you ever obtained or bought or anything like that, there was something very special about them. Not just because we're best friends, but because there was something about this was chosen for you as this is definitely because I picked it up and I showed Salt and I was like, oh, this is totally for Key. Look at the way it's shaped. Look at the holes.
Definitely, yeah. And it is still a very prized possession, hanging to this day, being the multivariate thing that it is and has become. I think there is really something there as well that ties into this whole line of transmission idea. Really on the same page as you, where even as the value of the stone goes up as it's passed from family member to family member, as the stone is passed from one person to another, there is definitely that transference of this person saying, here is something that protected me, now it protects you.
Absolutely. And while it is less common to see hagstones employed in the protection of sheep, interestingly, from this source, there is actually one case recorded in the Ettrick Valley in which it was tied to a tree in a sheep pen for, quote, a long time, being much weathered, but it was suspended by an almost new brown bootlace.
That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it just goes to show that like there's probably a history there of protecting that particular sheep pen,
Mhm.
you know?
It really reminds me of a lot of kind of folklore from the area around where I grew up, wherein shoes would be hung in either pastures or farm fields, kind of on scarecrows. Um,
Mm.
I've heard of a number of different accounts of where this comes from. Sometimes it's because hold objects other than stones carry similar properties, as we'll get into in a bit. But the classic joke that you can promise the devil your soul all you want, because whenever your shoe runs out, you're just going to hang that in the field and that's your soul. Yeah, it just kind of reminds me of that, similar apotropaic charm layering of the bootlaces with the hagstone, as we saw with the key and the stone.
And the beauty of homonyms and magic being such a powerful thing. And yeah, their use was especially common in Dumfriesshire, hanging over byres, stables, granaries, even built into the hollow walls of house doors. And they are particularly well known in use in Northern Ireland, in which almost all of the examples are of flint, though there are also versions of hematite, which could also be placed into the horns of cows, in addition to, around their neck to protect them during birth from having their milk taken and from disease. So, they could be tied around the horn, put around their neck, and certainly any other place where they're kept. And similar practices exist in Denmark. But I will now turn it over to you, Key, because you have some awesome German lore for us.
So a lot of the Germanic lore parallels what we've already heard today, with their primary functions being, the protection of animals and the protection of sleeping peoples or places that we discussed earlier. But hopefully I'll get into some of the differences and some of the specifics of some terminology that we'll get into in a minute. So I guess starting in the south of Germany and the Alpine regions of Austria, we see some of these stones called Linsensteine or lens stones in English, which alludes to their function as a scrying device or some sort of magical implement that grants a truer sight than what we have with our own eyes by looking through the hole, often accompanied with some sort of oral charm. But again, we see just a pure consecration through use and its quality being intrinsic to the material. As we go further north, but also, this is a very alive tradition that varies from village to village throughout the region. We see terms like Lochsteine, so whole stone or holy stone, as we see in England. But we see some more interesting ones. So Hühnergott or Hunchingat, literally chicken god.
Yay, chicken god!
Oh yeah. So we'll talk more about chicken gods in a bit, but this is a German neologism from Slavic sources.
Because I grew up calling them chicken god, like Pilechubog was the way that I first encountered these stones. So, and I always found it so cute because it's in Russian, it's in lots of different Slavic languages. It's certainly in Serbian, which is the language I grew up speaking. But it was one of those things that hagstone, witchstone, snakestone, there's plenty of them, right? And these all exist in Slavic sources too. But like chicken god is just my favorite because it's so cute. And I speak German too, but I had no idea that Hühnergott was a thing in German as well. And it makes sense because even when we get into Drache stuff, lots of that comes from Balkan and Slavic dragon sources. But like this just makes me so happy that it's there too. Yay, chicken god!
Definitely, yeah. And it's so nice as well that like the source of Hühnergott is like very concretely traced back to those Slavic sources that you're already immersed in. Which is super cool.
Yay!
So also commonly we see two really interesting names that will really be the meat and potatoes of the Germanic lore today, which are Trutensteine, which is a Trute stone or like a Drude stone. And we'll talk about what a Drude is in a sec, and a Schrattensteine or a Schrat stone. Drude and Schrat are classes of spirits, each of which could be multiple episodes all their own. And we will actually be doing episodes on these because I really want to write the Schrat episode. But for those unfamiliar, here's like a broad strokes overview of the two. The Drude is a night hag type of spirit that is said to run in the wild hunts that roam the countrysides of southern and specifically Alpine Germany, that crawl through the keyholes or hinges or gaps in the walls of homes at night that are along the procession of the hunt to squat on people's chests and induce nightmares. Very incubus-like spirit. And this is actually where we get the name Drude itself, which is from the Middle High German Trute, which means to like stomp on something or to press something, to compress it.
Mm-hmm.
So the primary defense against this type of spirit was to hang the Trutensteine, or the Hagstone, in the attic of the home by a ribbon, or if an infant was being accosted by one of these beings, on the side of the crib. There's also a really interesting charm that is sometimes paired with these stones that's called the Drudenfuss, or the foot of the Drude, which is an upside down pentagram that is etched into the side of the home or constructed out of wood, that is explicitly highlighted by Goethe's Faust to be able to repel demons and other nightmarish forces like these. One of the things I want to highlight as well with the Drude along those same lines is that depending on the folkloric account, they can be a witch, as we discussed earlier, these non-human beings who have become these very night hags, rather it be through a curse, specifically a curse, being leveled against her that turns her into one, by inheriting this initiation, usually along a maternal line in this area, or by an initiation directly from the hands of spirits that she may encounter. My favorite account of this is a warning that in a group of 7 sons, one of the sons will be a werewolf, and in a group of 7 daughters, one of the daughters will be a druide.
That's hot.
Mm-hmm. Super cool. I read that and I was like, whoa, all right, that's super cool. Going back to all the 7 son of 7 sons stuff we saw in a werewolf lore, cool to see it parodied again.
Mm-hmm.
So the Schrat is in my opinion, much more complicated figure, due simply to how broad a range of different beings are covered by this title or some variation thereof. The name itself is thought to come from the Old Norse skrati, which interchangeably can mean giant or magician, or witch for that matter. But in the most broad sense, modern usage of the term, it's equivalent to saying nature spirit in English. So it's like, okay, what is this thing? It's just like some spirit that's not living in my house, which is, everywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So specific uses of this term can refer to night hag-like spirits that are literally identical to the druide, just a different name depending on the region. Or it can refer to a domestic sprite or kobold that lives in the stove that appears and acts kind of like a house brownie or like the domovoy or something like this. Just the little old man who lives in your oven and does things around the house in exchange for porridge, but no thanks. Important part. One of the other variations on the kobold motif, Strat, can be a small cave-dwelling dwarf that can approach your house to offer luck in exchange for an offering of food. But they can also apply to much more malefic beings that exist throughout, Alpine Germany and Austria. So my favorite version of this is that the Schratchen or Schratlein can be the vampiric soul of an unbaptized baby that takes the form of a butterfly or a moth. Flying throughout the Alps, especially on the Feast of the Epiphany, led in a wild hunt-like procession by the figure Stempe, which is a regional variation of the enigmatic Frau Perchte, who herself will probably have an episode all her own.
My mind is blown. Like, as you gentlemen know, unbaptized babies, which we call the necrostensis, literally the unbaptized, come out in the form of butterflies or moths, or as like raven bodies with baby heads. But they are considered vampiric child spirits that that include like miscarriages and all kinds of things of that nature. Like, it's quite grisly. But the folklore around them is that they come out during the unbaptized days, the Necrostenidani, which is the period between Orthodox Christmas, which is January 7th, all the way through Orthodox Epiphany, which is January 19th. So I was under the impression that this was lore very localized to, the Balkans, but I'm blown away and so elated that this is here, and led by Frau Percha, we have our own version, of these kinds of spirits, including like Baba Roga, which is the Babas, as well as Morana and so on, that, lead the Nekršteni, Dani, and they lead the Nekrštenci specifically, so the unbaptized babies. But like, wow, I'm sorry, I'm like my brain is processing this, because like, one, it was cool to hear the chicken god thing, but this is even cooler, like that this lore exists. It's one of those things where sometimes you grow up and you're like, oh, this is like lore that comes from like my culture, and you find that it's like in other places. Like, it gets you so excited because you're like, whoa, this is like around.
Yeah, it's super fucking cool. It's like, just how alive a phenomena it is that it's literally traveling the world and popping up in places independently of each other, possibly. And just showing that these spirits will inject themselves into the world in the same way, and our traditions to work with them or appease them respectively kind of arise similarly. And it's super fucking cool to hear that, that also exists throughout the Balkans, which, possible post on that about some funny business I got up to coming soon. But
hell yeah.
Yeah, so continuing, the demonic retinue of screaming baby-headed ravens and moths that are trying to suck your blood. The Shrat can be the devil himself, or any devils in general. Really just that crop up in your life and fall under this kind of more woodlandy vibe of demonic spirit. One of the more interesting things that I've ever heard called a shrat would be kind of the shrat line, or someone suffering from shratvaiskein. So this person is a witch. In every account I've heard, this is a woman who is suffering from a matrilineally inherited hereditary curse, or kind of an initiation into witchcraft, depending on how you look at it. But, of course, goes back to these highly traumatic, often non-consensual initiations that will make one into a non-human being, jangle your soul around. And this specific soul wiggling is called the Shratvaiskein, which forces this woman to fall into a trance at midnight every night and leave her body in the form of a white mouse. She'll then run around the village in this guise and find an animal, usually it's cattle or horses, a tree, interestingly, or a person in the village, and she will press them, compress their chest, much like the Druida kind of incubus-like spirits that come from pressing, and will either do serious damage to this person or even kill them. But this process is said to also be extremely hard on the witch and make her incredibly ill and tired all the time, which is one of the main omens that this is occurring. And one of the best ways to actually lift this curse off of the person is to allow them to press to death the finest horse in the village, which is a requisite sacrifice to the curse itself and its appeasement.
That's so cool that you appease the curse by letting the white mouse formed witch just do her thing, like actually take out the best horse, and then she'll be free of this mandatory sojourn at night.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a really, interesting interpretation, depending on what side you go at it from, of, a lot of these kind of vampiric witchcraft traditions of what's the best thing to do. In a lot of cases, it's like, well, instead of persecute the witch, just let her do her own thing and don't bother her. And oftentimes it'll fix the problem. Speaking of witches keeping very interesting things, as you mentioned earlier, we see a reflex of the Shrat in the Drach, or the Drache as it evolves, the household serpent, which is sometimes called the Erhenne or Earth Hen, tied back to the chicken god. So, of course, with Svinga being Svinga, the Drache will have many episodes all its own. So we're not going to go down that rabbit hole just now.
Yeah, otherwise I'm going to take over and be like, so this is how that lore came to Germany, and this is the, the version of it as I understand it in the Balkans, and as it passed down to me by my teachers. La, 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 la. No, I'm just going to let you go. You go.
Yeah, so this is a Drache episode now.
No. This is the Hagstone episode, and we're going to let you finish your sentence.
It's dragons all the way down.
It is okay, and I won't hear any funny business any other way.
Run, Forrest, run!
So in the figure of the Drache, as we go way further afield from this Balkan source to up north into North Germany, like Mecklenburg and things like this, and even out into the Baltic states, we see the figure of the Schrat become more so the familiar gain from the devil, or the automata-like domestic servant known as the Krat, which I think we've referenced before in the film November.
Yeah.
Being
in the first episode on Toadman, we talked about November, and we will have a November themed movie episode, I'm sure, just because it's such a good movie. But yes, watch it if you want to know more about Kretz, please. November 2017. Go, go, go.
And this of course being very, very well documented in the Estonian folklore from which this movie is based.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the questions that I had after doing a lot of this research, hearing from sources, or a lot of this comes from two different books that are in German, so if you happen to speak it, check out Gerhard Prives and Jürgen Bumert's 2007 paper called Hundergotter Glücksteine von Strande, so Chicken Gods, Lucky Stones from the Beach, which great title for a paper.
Literally, yeah.
And then Rolf Reinecke's 2009 paper, Feuersteine Hundergotter, so Flint, the Chicken God.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so one of the questions I had after reading through all this is, why are so many different spirits being referred to as the Schrat? And I was able to, as best I could find it, apart from this explanation of, it's oral folklore, it's going to vary from village to village. It also stems out of Latin sources being translated into Old High German, where a diverse array of spirits that are highly codified in Latin. So the Pelosi, which are the hairy sprites, fauns, satyrs, Silvestris homines, or the forest people, incubi, and larvae even, all become Schrat.
Mm-hmm.
And it similarly retains the Old Norse inheritance of witch or magician or giant, and it just becomes this big confusing mess. So the reason why I wanted to go through all that in the first place is that in each of these cases, it is the same hagstone that is utilized as the primary defense against the influence of this vast array of beings, which really gets into the multivariate use as a protective charm that just works against kind of everything under the sun.
Mm.
So one of the other protective charms that was really linked to the hagstone that I wanted to talk about was the Schrattenfuß. So much like the Drudenfuß, the upside down pentagram, there's the Schrattenfuß, which, of course, much like the Schrat, is 10 different things. So they're identical pentagram figures, either upright or inverted, sometimes carved into surfaces of houses, or are sometimes assembled from sticks of 5 different types of wood and hung above doors. There's also variations on this figure that look kind of like the letter H and the letter X imposed on each other, made of 5 different sticks of 5 different types of wood that are hung alongside hagstones above the doors of barns and stables. Or they can even be fossilized dinosaur footprints that are found throughout the region up in the mountains that are paired with these stones to increase their efficacy, much like the stacking of the iron keys and teeth earlier and things like this. So there is another type of stone on top of all these that is also named the Schrattensteine, linked to the hagstone. That is the belemnite, which is the fossilized remains of cephalopods in the now extinct genus Belemnitida. And these stones are both the preferred weapons of the Schratlein, the type of witch that we talked about earlier, which she uses to fire arrows that induce illnesses and plagues. Of course, playing into this motif in especially alpine regions of Germany, where it's the arrows that bring the plague, and disease-bringing spirits are conceptualized as being archers or women who can throw javelins and arrows and things like this. But it is the same Schrattenstein that is the preferred form of protection against the same arrows.
Hmm.
So, of course, with the Hagstones as well, as much as they are the tools of kind of the populace in the popular consciousness to protect against witchcraft, they're also extremely potent tools to undo those same protections at the hands of witches.
It's interesting seeing that the comparison here between using it and not using it. It's kind of reminds me of like how it's used. In English folklore, you can look at the spirits through it, or it can protect you from them. But like it can be both a means of congress with them and also a way to protect against them.
Yeah. Like, I don't know, something that really occurs to me as well is the link between the Schottenstein and the being a Bellum Knight, with the toadstone, right? Which is a batrachite, the fossilized teeth of the Lepidodus, the extinct genus of fish from the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
it's so cool. And I think that it's also interesting that you bring up is that hagstones are both the weapons and the protection. I mean, certainly hagstones are used constantly by spirits, including witches and including lots of other kinds of creatures. There's even, reports that, fairies themselves use them and braid it into their own, horse's hair, but at the same time, they're used to protect horses from fairies.
Definitely, yeah, and what happens when, the witch is whispering her curses through the same hole to send them to you, that you're whispering them back through the hole to send back to her. And
New
it's
phone,
just
who this?
rock phone. Yeah, it's like, there's this constant interplay between what is the tool of protection and what is the weapon. And it really comes down to the hands of the magician or the hands of the charmer or cunning person employed
Mhm.
to fight the witch. So, one of the key takeaways, apart from the give and take of the diverse roles of these stones, is there is a ton of overlap regionally throughout Europe with the stones that we're kind of presenting today, being protection of the sleeping body from the witches and spirits that would otherwise seek to interfere with you at night, being associated with serpents, elves, fairies, nature spirits, and the domestic treasure hunters in the form of the kobolds and the drache and the krat. One of the things I wanted to bring up before I hand the episode back over to Svinga to talk about some of the Slavic lore is a little bit of more explicit overlap there with hagstones in their office as the chicken god. From this neologism, despite it being one, they're considered sacred to Donar, so Germanic Thor, to whom the chicken is already a sacred offering.
Mhm.
And in their role as the Drudensteiner as well, good old Jacob Grimm. We love some Jacob Grimm on this podcast.
Mhm.
Suggests that Drude is a term that itself is derived from Trut, which is an archaic German form meaning dear or beloved, a title which he links to the Valkyrie Thruder, who is, of course, the daughter of Thor and Sif. So these stones having the direct genealogical link in that way. There's
Mhm.
also a parallel to the aforementioned Belemnite stones or Schrattensteine, which are sometimes, instead of Schrattensteine or Belemnite, are called Donnerkiel or Thunderstones, being immediately concretely linked to Donar and similar thunder deities in this way.
And boy, howdy, are we about to go into that? Because, first of all, I really appreciate you sharing some of the German stuff that I didn't get a chance to look into yet. I'm still pretty blown away by some of the connections. And I find the way that language, like chicken god being an expression from Slavic speaking countries, making its way to Germany, and then becoming incorporated, through neologism and homonym to Thor. But then at the same time, hagstones being sacred to many deities, Slavic gods, especially Perun, right? Who is the god of thunder and lightning and order, and is greatly linked to Thor in cross-cultural comparisons, right? So I could, go into the Slavic stuff for ages because my main tradition is Balkan traditional witchcraft. But I think, you'll hear me switch dialects, for those of you who understand South Slavic languages, Slovenian, Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, North Macedonian, Bulgarian. So you'll hear like different things being said. It's just because like I'm trying to compile various examples. But, my being, Serbo-Croatian being my main language, you'll hear that mostly reflected. So I think it's worth noting. I don't want to make this too long, but because I could really go on about it forever. But across Slavic speaking languages, we keep hearing like chicken god, right? So Bog Pilatine, Pilichi Bog. These terms mean the god of chickens, or the chicken's god. And this is because they were commonly hung over chicken coops to protect them from predators and disease, right? So the stone itself is the deity of the chickens, is the protector of them, because our understanding of deity, or holiness or divinity can apply to, patron trees, can apply to patron stones, sacred, implements that are used only in the moment. They're the deity only in that moment that it's being used, for that purpose. And then is no longer when it's longer used for that, which I think maybe gives us a bit of a hint as to why some of these amulets are said to lose their power, but then also spontaneously regain it depending on how they're being handled. But Chicken God is far from the only name, right? It's the one that I grew up using, but there's countless monikers for Hagstones, and there's no way we can list all of them. But here's a bit of a sample, right? So we have Dog's Heart, Psechim Srcem, Dog's God, like Chicken God, Psechim Bogum, Dog's Luck, or Dog's Fortune, Pasjar Srecha. So these dog-related motifs are reference mostly to Vela's, Perun's adversary. He's the lord of cattle, wolves, agriculture, wilderness, magic, tectonic world, and far, far more. And of course, we have Perun's arrow, Perunum Strelium, which is linked to thunderbolts, the Gromovnikom, and thunderstone, Gromovnichki Kamen, or Kamen Groma. And these last three are obviously due to the link that to Perun as the deity of thunder, who was greatly associated with Thor, but also Perun as the god of thunder ordered in the heavenly realms is said to strike holes into stones through his furious lightning, and that this is what creates them. And so the thunderstones, which interestingly, Perun's arrows is also a nickname for fulgurites, which of course form when lightning strikes sand. So plenty of these things are said to be linked to him, but interestingly, it's the thunderstone as the idea of the hagstone being specific kinds of hagstones that are linked to Perun that are, again, it's said that the hole was formed by lightning and therefore they become sacred to dragons. But I'll pause there before it becomes too much, because we'll bring it back. There's going to be episodes on all this, I promise. We just have quite a list to get through first, and it's on the back burner for sure. And of course, we have plenty of the serpent ones, right? So serpent stone, miski kamen, from the belief that they are black eggs from which basilisks hatch. This is especially prominent in Russia. A snake's poison is miski otrov. A snake's egg is misko yaye. Witch's stone, kamen veshtica, again, many of the different kinds of, witch stone type perils. And one of my favorites is God's eye, Boží oko. So, the eye of God itself, which is, you would praise your hagstone with some of these titles. So you wouldn't just this is just a dialectical difference of some people call it this and some people call it that. Many people were aware of multiple names for these, and they would praise the stone. They would hold it in their hands and sing to it and praise it and be like, you're the God's eye if you want to look through it and see the truth, for example. You're the snake's poison if you want to use it to cure yourself from disease, and so on and so forth. And they would be hung by other sacred objects with holes. So you could have a hagstone hanging next to a shell or a pot, because the pots, the handles are the holes, shoes made of braided dried linden leaves and husks, baskets, the necks from broken jugs of clay, etc. Things that have holes in them so that spirits and magical power can pass to them easily. And an appropriate time to try and search for and obtain hagstones on beaches is typically the 1st of July, which is a day sacred to Yarilo, the war and fertility god, who is also linked to St. George and celebrated on May 6th, which is the Orthodox as St. George's Day. Additionally, in Russia, January 15th, which lies between Easter and Epiphany again on the Orthodox calendar, or the Julian one specifically, is another day in which it is said the basilisk was born from its black rooster egg, and thereby when hagstones themselves were created. So if you wish to find a hagstone, there's actually even an oral charm that can help you on your search, and my translation is as follows.
Soon I'll find a pebble which will bring happiness to the house. Show me a faithful friend, I will examine everything around. And
at every repetition of this, you're saying this over and over again, you drop one millet seed into the ground. And the idea is that as nature accepts your alms, she will help reveal to you a hagstone in your search. So it's not just about randomly looking around, right? Or in Keith's case, summoning a mineralogist to do your bidding. You
can where the name charms. Faithful Friend comes from.
It is indeed, yeah. So going, oh no, back to Triberg all over again, and Keith being able to command men to do his bidding. Oh God.
It's just the world charm, it's show me a faithful friend and a mineralogist shall appear.
Yeah, so in this case, you're making an offering to land spirits, right? To literally be like, hey, I'm just what I'm looking for. I know it's a treasure among your people, but accept this offering and show me the faithful friend. And there's plenty of properties that these are, stones inherit. Certainly, we have the same motifs of, protecting animals from diseases and attacks from predators and the evil eye placed by the barn or chicken coop, as we mentioned. They also grant protection against magical attacks by sending everything back through the hole to the sender. And they're also used as wish granting talismans, right? So you might hold one in your hand and make a wish, or spin it over your head, almost like a bull roar, to ask the spirits of the air, the veterani voivodes, so like the wind dukes as we call them, to grant your wish. Most oral lore says that in order for the Hagstones, or the chicken god, or whatever we're calling its properties, to activate, you have to find it yourself. So again, here we go back to kind of that motif of like, can you inherit it? Yes, but it's good for you to find it yourself. So some say that you should actually say a particular prayer or an oral charm when you find it, such as seizing it in your right hand and saying,
"The stone was sent to me by fate. May it protect me from evil and grant me fortune."
And if you wish to wear the stone, it should be strung up on natural material, such as wool, linen, or hemp. I usually wear mine on waxed linen thread, actually, and I've kind of tied it up so that the string actually adjusts, and I keep a fossilized snake vertebrae right over it as a central bead. So you can place the stone in the palm of your hand, whisper to it what you wish to see, and you move it, you kind of like start rubbing it on your palm clockwise with your index finger, and then you breathe through the hole, place it to your right eye, closing the left, and stare at the sky or at any other place in order to see the future and an augury in nature, right? So like how many crows pass by, how many leaves do you spot in the tree through the hole, and so on. And the same can be done, of course, for seeing spirits and being granted the ability to discern and to see a spirit before you. Others say that you should keep the stone in holy water under the rays of the sun for a full day, and you take it out at night, hold it in your palms, and say,
Holy amulet, become my assistant and protector always and in all things. Faithful friend and companion, help me overcome obstacles and avoid bitterness and regret. Grant me strength and eliminate my adversaries. I will treat you with gratitude and always remember your kindness. May this stone be illuminated forever. Amen.
And another version of the same charm is,
Chicken god, protector of good people, drive evil spirits away from me. Open the way for me to realize my cherished dream. Protect me from misfortune. You have endowed me with strength and happiness in life. May my wealth increase. May my health be strengthened. May my love in my heart not be extinguished, but light from another fire. May success await me in all endeavors. Amen.
So these are just some charms in Croatian and Serbian that I translated into English for you guys, just to give you an idea of the kinds of prayers that one might use in finding them and in kind of activating them or using them. And of course, there's plenty of other simple ones, right? So for example, to prevent toothache, you place the hagstone to your tooth and you whisper the following.
The pain from this tooth disappears. It enters the stone and it never comes back.
The same can be done by taking 2 stones on either sides of your temples in order to cure headaches, or in any other locations by essentially sandwiching whatever part hurts between the hagstones. They can also be strung up in groups such as 3s, 5s, 7s, 9s, 13s, 21s, each corresponding with different virtues depending on local lore. The same goes for how many holes there are. Stones with 2 and 7 holes are especially prized, with the latter being used to materialize spirits and grant them physical bodies, being often buried under the tree or placed in the clay pot that will become its new home, or the cauldron, or like the cast iron, sort of depending on the the spirit or the deity and what material it prefers. Some deities prefer certain numbers as well. So for example, Perun likes hagstones with 6 holes, Mokosh with 4, and so on. Across Slavic-speaking countries, you'll also hear of typologies based on the color of the stone itself, with each linking the stone to particular deities and spiritual kingdoms. In sorcery, stones with spots, especially red or black ones, are especially prized in order to protect lovers from quarrels, cheating, and witchcraft set to disturb their relationship. Gifting a spotted hagstone to a straying husband will prevent him from looking at other women and cheating. Same with bathing the stone in water or milk in which you already washed a newborn kitten or a bat. Newborn kittens or bats are hugely used in love magic because it's said that because they're seen as blind, then so too will your lover be blind to anyone but you. So you wash them first in water or milk, and then you wash the hagstone the same, and the power of each transfers to it. They can also be stored in the wallet to protect against theft and to promote wealth, or placed above the bed to ward against nightmares, in the center of the threshold, or over the doorway to protect against intruders and unwanted spirits, and tied to the keys to secure the home. And again, the iron key plus the hagstone double the protection. One interesting kind of practice as well is that you might pour your own breast milk through its hole in order to help with anything having to do with children and the health of the mother.
gains when you're a bodybuilder.
Oh god. Ah. Oh my god. I'm not ready for the bodybuilders drinking breast milk meme to come back. And I say come back as if we've referenced it on the podcast. We haven't. It's just a constant joke between me and Keys, the way that we accidentally stumbled across like a whole thing about bodybuilders and breast milk. But anyway, you two gentlemen are big into bodybuilding, which good for you guys. I'm going to the gym with you in solidarity, but I'm doing my cardio. Actually, I am starting to lift a little bit. We're definitely getting there, but none of us are quite on that particular diet. Although I
Yeah.
will say protein is completely fine. That is really funny though. That, that I will say though, something about stopping up breast milk in is obviously a huge concern, right? In terms of like a mother might see herself as being cursed in some ways. But interestingly, breast milk is especially sometimes like from like an older woman and then also a younger woman, or from like a married woman and an unmarried woman. Like sometimes the breast milk from both will be added to the dough that will make a bread that will be shared with spirits or be used for healing in certain ways. And because bread magic is such a thing in like the Balkans specifically, like so many different variations of like the Slavski kolach, like the bread that is served in the Slava or like a saint's feast, as well as like the bread that's blessed in the church versus the bread taken to the cemetery and so on. The ones with breast milk are especially prized. Like those are the ones that you really want to use. And so I imagine that, I've heard versions in which the breast milk first passes through a hagstone before it's added to the actual recipe in order to kind of foster particular virtues that otherwise you don't really have. One thing that's also good to know is we mentioned places and how you obtain it. We've talked about colors, which I don't want to get too into specifically just because like they can get very specific about the color of the hagstone. It also depends on the materials. So if it's like a malachite, for example, or if it's quartz hagstones, like they have particular properties that are sacred to certain spirits. But you also have the shape, the color, the number of the holes. 2 is very much used for dreaming. 7 is very much used for conjuring, as well as like pacting with spirits into physical form. Buried, in certain numbers in the roots of trees that you're making as the tree dedicated to that particular spirit, as a lot of like Balkan magic enshrines spirits in trees. But we also have where you actually find them. So like what was the weather like and where did you find it? So in the rain, if you find a hagstone, it said that this will help with a good harvest and will help with like financial profit. In sunny weather, it's going to promote fortune and good luck. And the snow just means good news is coming to you or good travels. If you find it in the morning, it will promote like an honest life, whatever that means. And essentially, like the source that I was consulting for this, and I talked to my aunt a little bit about it as well, is she was saying like this is really about having a pious, like a righteous life. It assists in preserving your integrity and ensuring that no one slanders you, but like your voice is always you holding to your ideals will stand the test of time. In the afternoon, it'll promote a good family environment. You can hang it over your hearth to assist with the home. And in the evening, it will assist in the acquisition of longevity, so kind of like health. Evening hagstones, those ones that you find then are really good for healing the body. And at night, it's said to help overcome all difficulties. So this is the one that's especially used for breaking curses and any magic sent against you, but also to turn someone's fortune around if they've been really down in the dumps. So it's just some things I want to share from like Slavic contexts. We could obviously go into much greater detail, especially with regards to like how these are actually used, but a lot of that is a bit more private to my tradition, so I can't quite share it as readily. But I hope this was interesting. I hope that chicken god becomes a phrase that sticks in your head for the rest of your life whenever you see a hagstone, because we have dog god too, right? But there's something about chicken god that's just so cute in English. It's cute in Serbian too, though, and Russian. But yeah, so that's a little bit on hagstones. And thank you so much. This was a little bit of like me and Key double teaming the episode again, like we did with Ginnerfurt. And thank you guys so much for reading the quotes. I'm very, very pleased by how researching this episode resulted in us not only finding all these other cool topics we're going to present on for sure in the future, whether it's the much teased werewolf series of episodes and now, the Drude, but also just interesting parallels. Because when we do the Drache episode, you and I are definitely, I think, going to pop off because we even really started becoming friends, not just over Tuba Veneris, but over Drachas. You contacted me asking about like, hey, what's this lore? Like, you're the dragon lady, right? You know all this stuff. And I was like, oh, well, let me tell you exactly how that's like. And then I ended up training you and keeping a Zmiechu Kucha or Dracha, the house serpent. And oh, how things have gone. And now we will share that soon with you, moving in with me and my love. But there we have it. Thank you guys so much for your time. For our Akashic records, mine is none other than A Song, a Story, and a Stone by Ingoan Ring from their absolutely beautiful album that I've spent quite a good deal of time, I think, listening to, which is The Serpent and the Dove. Gotta love it. And they have great album art too, very alchemical.
Very, very, very cool band.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely a good choice for an Akashic record, King. Very
Thank you.
My Akashic record for the day is I Am the Mountain by Stoned Jesus. The of course, Stone Jesus,
He's the Holy
chicken
Stone.
god. Yeah, the Holy Stone being in the mountain, being the dwarven cave dwelling permutation of the shot. That album that's off of is Seven Thunders Roar, which, of course, Thunderstones, Donar, Peru.
I love it. I love it. You
Yeah.
thought this one out. You mapped it. Like you have the whole like red string on your cork board. Salt baby, you need to start suggesting some of the Akashic records. We need to get your music taste in here.
I don't know about that. I think I'll leave this one to you guys, to be honest.
All right, very well. The Akashic records will continue to be the purview of myself and Key. But if you ever do want to suggest one, you're more than welcome. I know that you'll send some joke ones, and then we'll laugh about it and not put it in the episode. But just know that it is much appreciated.
Will do. Maybe keep your ears open next week, folks, and I'll see what I can bring up.
Yeah, you just give us one. Let's hear a little bit of your music taste.
Sounds good.
And quick announcement, obviously, thank you so much to everyone who has been following us on Twitter, twitter.com/Frightful Howls, supporting us on Patreon, patreon.com/The Frightful Howls. As always, we have Salt's Almanac, we have all our extra lore and goodies, we have our Q&As every month, where you're free to suggest, anonymous suggestions and things and questions, and we'll answer them for you in a more low-key environment. And, obviously episode suggestions always welcome. But thank you so much for everyone who's been supporting us. It truly means the world. And we have lots of new goodies coming for you as well on Patreon soon. And thank you everyone who's shown so much immense interest in Key's scrying tutoring. Ever since the last episode came out, we didn't even have the link on the website yet. Lots of you sent in your emails asking for the opportunity for him to coach and mentor and develop personalized sessions to open up your mediumship with your specific court. It's been hugely helpful. The link is now on the website in our consultations page on withcunningandcommand.com. So if you would like to book something with Key, spots are very limited. So please do send in your emails and you'll be able to book a session shortly.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks everyone so much for all the correspondence I've already received. As soon as the episode went live, yeah, my inbox was pretty much flooded, and I'm just so appreciative of how much you guys are willing to support me in that class and us in the podcast.
Truly, you guys are the best, and we're really excited. This is a new podcast, right? We only started on Walpurgisnacht, but I'm really looking forward to see where we'll go, especially with more personal episodes like we did with the scrying one, with more research ones, and just with also kind of the fun things we have planned for our patrons. So thank you so much. Always remember, we only have one tier, $10 a month. So if you'd like to support us, that is absolutely the best way. And each and every one of you and your continuing assistance and help with the aspects of running the podcast itself truly means the world to us. And we're always excited to answer your questions in our monthly Q&As. With that said, our license to depart, as always, read by the Basilisk's Egg Key, is this time from Eliphas Levi's Prayer of the Gnomes from the Dogma and Ritual of High Magic. Hit us with it.com.
O invisible king, who, taking the earth for foundation, didst hollow its depths to fill them with thy almighty power. Thou whose name shaketh the arches of the world, thou who causest the seven metals to flow through the veins of the rocks, King of the seven lights, rewarder of the subterranean workers, lead us into the desirable air and into the realm of splendor. We watch and we labor unceasingly, we seek and we hope by the 12 stones of the holy city, by the buried talismans, by the axis of the lodestone, which passes through the center of the earth. O Lord, O Lord, O Lord, have pity upon those who suffer. Expand our hearts, detach and upraise our minds, enlarge our natures. O stability and motion, O darkness veiled in brilliance, O day clothed in night, O Master who never thus withhold the wages of thy workmen. O silver whiteness, O golden splendor, O crown of living and melodious diamond, thou who wearest the heavens on thy finger like a ring of sapphire, thou who hides beneath the earth in the kingdom of gems the marvelous seed of the stars, live, reign, and be thou the eternal dispenser of the treasures whereof thou hast made us the warders. Amen, amen, amen.